Welcome back to the Keiser Human Performance Podcast, and in this case, two smart guys in Arizona talking and Gabe listening. I have Rich Pruett here, Director of Performance at Exos out of Phoenix, Arizona, and Head Performance Coach with Arizona State Men's Hoops, and creator of the Force System, Hunter Eisenhower. Gentlemen, how are we doing today?
Doing great, Gabe. I
Yeah.
appreciate you having us on, man.
Doing awesome. Appreciate it.
Of course, Hunter, we understand that you are on the road in Boulder, Colorado, so thank you for making some time. Rich, thank you as well. Guys, let's just dive right into it. I want to start with assessments, and Rich, I'm going to begin with you. What are your go-to evaluations right now? What are your core assessments that provide the most value to you and your team as we look at athletic performance?
It's a loaded question, and I think Hunter and I have had a lot of extensive conversations regarding this specific topic. So within the Exos system, when we bring everybody in, it is a counter movement jump on the force plate, and then we collect an RSI through two different means, whether that is the multi-rebound test or a drop jump test, depending upon the specific position and sport that they're playing. That's our four splits. Like everyone goes through that. Then we'll take them through a load velocity profile on a Keiser air squat in order to collect the optimal power resistance and velocity at optimal power resistance. We will also take them through a Keiser prone leg curl LVP as well, load velocity profile, collecting the same metrics there, OPR and velocity at OPR. And then it goes on from there, right? Depending upon their sport, their position, the time of the year that they're in, any previous injury histories or injury prevalence that they have within those sport and the position that they play. We can take them through a leg extension LVP. We can take them through a sprint profiling assessment as well, a conditioning assessment, just kind of the list goes on depending upon what your specific tasks are within your environment you're operating.
Awesome. Hunter, before I go over to you, Rich, just one quick follow-up on that. Why did you choose to go with the leg curl with the LVP?
Lead debated topic, I think, right now. So we took all of our information regarding isometric assessments and profiling, we'll call it, just for simplicity's sake, we'll call it hamstring profiling. Not necessarily hamstring profiling, it's really like posterior chain profiling. We took our isometric assessments, like bilateral and unilateral overcoming ISO 30s, standing 90s and so forth. And with the data that we had over the past few years, we weren't really able to find any correlations between injury risk, injury mitigation, and we were really looking for something that was able to objectively identify a posterior chain assessment through like leveraging velocity, right? Really like kind of tapping into neuromuscular assessments, looking at a range of motion that also involved velocity. So now we are taking them through unilateral load velocity profiles, left and right side, and collecting their optimal power resistance and their velocity optimal power resistance, then we can build in asymmetries there.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. I'm sure there's a lot we can go into on that, which we will. And Hunter, I'm going to kick it over to you now in terms of your battery of assessments, things that you find very valuable throughout the entire year. Where are you at with that?
Yeah, so it does depend because the off season, the battery of assessment that I have is much bigger. The in season period, it gets very simple because obviously in the in season you have more time. You're focused on different qualities and trying to develop those certain qualities. Whereas the in season, I'm not saying that you're not trying to develop certain qualities. However, the time that you have to train and also assess gets limited, and you have to be as efficient, as effective as possible. So the in season and off season kind of change. I'll go through the entire thing and then I can explain what I touch on in the in season.
Sure.
But for me, for the off season, there's a couple different categories. The one place I start, and the reason I start here is because the most simple to collect, and it's something that I do all year round, multiple times a week, is just 3 different assessments on the force plates. So I will do a bilateral CMJ hands on hips. I'll do a multi-rebound assessment, specifically a 4 jump. And if we want to talk about different multi-rebound assessments, Rich said he uses the drop jump, which is not a multi-rebound assessment, but similar family. There's also the 10-5, which is very popular. I've chosen and I've used the 4 jump for a couple years now. And then also assessment that I don't want to say I created. It sounds kind of arrogant.
You can say you created
it. But I haven't seen it. However, it's the CMJ single leg land, which is a bilateral hands on hip CMJ landing on a single leg, which I'm actually going through a return to play case right now. And I have backlogs of CMJ single leg land data on the individual. And it's been very powerful to look at CMJ data now and seeing potential to return to pre-injury state or closer to. And then you put them in a CMJ single leg land and you're like, wow, there is dramatic asymmetry. So those are 3 assessments I use. The CMJ and the multi-rebound I use consistently year-round. The CMJ single leg land is typically like an off-season assessment just because it is a little bit more tedious to do. From a speed perspective, the assessment that I really hang my hat on is a 5+10, so a 5-yard build into a 10-yard fly through lasers. And the last 2 years, that was year-round weekly. This year, I've actually taken it out of the in-season period for different reasons. And then throughout the off-season, that will extend to further distances. So we'll get all the way to a 25+10. So a 25-yard build into a 10-yard fly with a bunch of basketball players, and they get to max velocity at that point. I'm not doing that week 1 by any means, but we progressively add distance to that assessment to get them to assessing what their true max velocity is. From that same realm, from a change direction perspective, I'll use a 10-0-5. So that's going to be you're starting 10 yards off the change direction line. There's lasers 5 yards away from you, so splitting that distance in half. You're sprinting 5, tripping the lasers at 5, touching the line, coming back 5. So between those 2 assessments, I just said the 5+10 and the 10-0-5, you can get a change direction deficit, which admittedly I haven't done a ton with, but I do think there is value in seeing the athletes that are more inclined to change direction versus linear speed. And then you can get into archetyping and kind of predicting what you could expect to see based on the athlete in front of you. And then finally, the last change direction and speed family assessment that I use is a lateral 5-0-5, which is going to be, it really is a 6-0-5 because I have the athletes line up a yard off of the laser so they don't trip it with a hand when they start moving or something. But it's going to be 6 yards off the change direction line, lasers at 5. It's going to be a lateral slide, no crossover step, touch, and then come back through. For a strength assessment, I've went back and forth on a couple things, and something that I've used pretty consistently is just a trap bar deadlift using VBT and finding what their load is at about 0.5 meters per second, which is about 80%, which is just something that I can then rely on and use periodically throughout the year to evaluate general strength measures. One that I'm high on and very keen on currently that I'm using newer to this battery is a body weight split squat ISO. And by body weight, I mean body weight additional load. So if I'm 200 pounds, it'd be an additional 200 pounds. So let's say 100-pound dumbbell in each hand, a split squat ISO for 30 seconds. That's something I took from Tanner Care, and I've messed around with finding various ways to evaluate strength outside of just like this concentric bias that we live in. And I think that to me takes away the skill, takes away the technical aspects of executing like a movement, a traditional exercise. Yeah. And you're also evaluating isometric strength, which I think is more closely related to sport than concentric strength, which we typically evaluate. And then finally, the last couple are just going to be general body comp. We use it in body, so really just looking at obviously body weight and then muscle mass and body fat percentage. And then the last one is going to be max vert, and that's something I just use in the off-season period. And that is a vertex set up in front of the rim, and the athlete can approach that vertex however they want as long as they're starting within the college 3-point line. 2 feet, 1 foot. And I do think it's interesting to look at the strategy they prefer to use, but really just tracking jump height on that. And then to round that out, as I said, in season, I've done the 5+10 weekly for most of my time here at ASU, but we are going to be on force plates doing the CMJ and multi-rebound weekly, if not multiple times a week.
Okay, lots to chew on there. Appreciate you outlining all of that. I think I'm going to call the bilateral CMJ single leg land the Eisenhower test.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to stop you from doing that, but I'm
writing that down right now. It's going in the notes.
That's the Eisenhower CMJ single leg land.
Yeah, it makes me cringe a little bit to hear that, but I appreciate the.
Yeah, yeah, that's why. um, so, question for you here. I kind of want to dive more into that. I really also like the body weight split squat iso. I imagine with these, basketball players that you're working with, long lever athletes, it's nice you get to test the single leg and do it in a really comfortable manner and something that you can do quite often if you really choose to, kind of at a low orthopedic cost. So any correlations you're seeing between that, and I know you're just starting with that CMJ single leg land and just getting a better idea, but maybe any correlation between those two right now?
I would say that the split squat ISO is too new for me to
Mm-hmm.
understand, but I just think that there's so much value in the CMJ single leg land for like a multitude of reasons, because at its simplest form, you can just assess the like psychological confidence the athlete has to achieve a certain jump height when they know they're landing on either limb. And that's just like, it's so simple, but it's really just assessing that piece of like, okay, if I know, for me, like my right leg is horrible, my left leg is like still fairly athletic. It's what I jumped off all the time when I played basketball. So when I know I'm landing on my left leg, I'll jump 4, 5, 6 centimeters higher than when I know I'm landing on my right. So right there, that's a flag. And then I also think the metric from Hawken Dynamic, landing performance index, is a really cool metric, which is landing height and landing phase and a ratio between the two. And it's a really cool metric to look at with this specifically, because you get to see the landing height and also the time it takes to control the landing portion of the movement. So with those two right there, like the return to play example I brought up, I did the initial assessment recently because it's not something you're going to do like right away in a return to play case. This was a lower leg ankle situation, so it's not like I'm going to have him do this assessment right away. But once I felt comfortable with implementing this, it was kind of like CMJ first, then we did multi-rebound, now we're implementing the CMJ single leg land. And when I first did the test with him, he was 35 or 36 centimeters on both sides, landing on both limbs. So I was
Okay.
like, okay, it's like even. I was like pretty impressed. And then when I looked at LPI, his unaffected limb was like 16% off his average in his LPI, and his affected limb was like 46% off his average in his LPI. So I think that just jump height is the most glaring thing that you can really see of just initial assessment. 48 centimeters on one, 41 on the other. Okay, there's some psychological or a lack of confidence there. And then you can look at LPI and really dig under the hood a little bit more of like, okay, jump height might be the same, but LPI is very different. And I think that can tell you a ton as well.
It's almost like you're taking the same principles of the change of direction deficit and just implementing it within the vertical vector, right? Are you like flagging any of them that aren't hitting a certain percentage of their counter movement jump height, like their bilateral jump? So is it like 85%, or is it like, have you found any thresholds there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The reason that I came up with this test is because I became obsessed with, and this is all the way back to my time with the Kings, like I became obsessed with finding like a simple way to quantify deceleration that's more effective, that you're able to use more often than like setting up a 10-0-5. I'm not going to have my entire team run 10-0-5s throughout an in-season period, but I would have them do a single CMJ single leg land. It's a little bit more efficient. So that was really the thing that I want to try to accomplish, was quantifying deceleration and seeing if there's correlation amongst that with more horizontally oriented assessments. To answer the second part of your question, I've thought about two different things, and I don't have like a threshold right now, but it's what you said of, are they able to achieve a certain jump height of their just traditional bilateral CMJ, and that could be a flagging system. And then also the asymmetry between the two limbs from a jump height perspective, but then more specifically an LPI perspective. So I don't have like a standardized 80%, 85%, 90%, whatever it may be. But as I collect more data and can potentially correlate it with horizontal deceleration tasks, lateral deceleration tasks, then potentially a threshold may present itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
I appreciate you guys outlining all of the assessments. It's fantastic. And I kind of am so eager to get into the okay, then what aspect of all of that, right? I really do. So, Hunter, I'm going to go back to you here. Okay, we flagged this deficit, right? So what? How do we approach this now? How do we approach this with our training?
specifically with the CMJ single leg land?
Yeah,
Or
let's just start there because I think it's really intriguing. I think a road to go down. So let's go with that.
well, I think what I've seen a lot in my population, and this is unfortunately very commonly what you see is this asymmetry that may present, is an athlete's population of basketball players, just like every sport, but especially basketball players, are typically dealing with some sort of varying levels of patellar tendinopathy. Like it's just part of basketball, and I try to do as good of a job as I can to keep that at bay, but it's just the nature of the sport. So what I have seen is that typically if there is a very big asymmetry, it is going to be based off of this chronic discomfort that an athlete experiences on one of the two limbs, and that would lead to probably a decrease in jump height when they know they're landing on that limb that's dealing with the discomfort. And then also something that you notice as well, which this isn't something I talked about to this point, is the stiffness at which they land on that limb. So you can get into different variables in terms of metrics that you might be able to look at, like peak braking force typically is going to be higher on a limb that you land with a more rigid strategy. And the reason is because they don't want to move their knee through any range of excursion when you're dealing with that patellar tendinopathy. So you'll see an athlete jump, their LPI will typically be lower or worse on the side that's dealing with the tendinopathy. Their braking metrics from a peak perspective will typically be higher because they're less willing to move through a range of motion on that limb. So that's just like, now you don't need this assessment to figure out if somebody's knee is causing some discomfort. However, that is an important place to start because that discomfort and that patellar tendinopathy that they could potentially be dealing with, that they've probably dealt with a long time, is just going to create a chain reaction through that whole side of the body, that entire limb. Because like knowing myself, for example, one of the reasons I never used my right leg when I played basketball is because my right knee always hurt. So then now I'm to this point where my left leg is so much more developed. So I think that seems like a specific case of patellar tendinopathy, but it is something that continues to pop up with this assessment is big asymmetry. Yeah, like my right knee always hurts. So I think that beginning to tackle that specifically from like a local perspective with what I say within force system terms like slow force loading, then you begin to make changes in just like the function of the tissue of an athlete, and how long they've dealt with it is probably quite a while. So if you're able to affect that, then they gain more confidence of landing in that limb and you begin to see that clear up. So that's a specific example, but one of the ones that I see fairly often, especially with my population.
Awesome. Thank you. Really nicely outlined. Rich, for you, going back to maybe some of the assessments that you had mentioned, the ability to perform unilateral assessments. Curious to hear from you. Okay, red flag. We have, a large discrepancy between right versus left. Hey, we've also have some self-reported pain. Maybe there's an injury we're even aware of. It all kind of makes sense. Okay, like how do we go about attacking this?
So I think it's important to not just throw out one of the reasons, right? We were talking earlier about how we weren't able to find any type of like strong correlation, for posterior chain risk mitigation and risk identification or anything like that, right? And obviously, soft tissue injuries are going to happen in sport. That's just the nature of sport. And we're constantly looking for like that gold nugget, like what is that one assessment that we could leverage to help us really identify any type of risk. So I say that because we've got guys that are having like 27%, 30% plus asymmetries in a prone hamstring LVP that don't have any injuries, that don't have any. So that right there is interesting, and it gives us an idea of what we need to start attacking. I think asymmetries are going to inherently exist within the organism. I think that's just a natural adaptation. But once we say if we have someone that is functional without pain, we use that term, and they have an asymmetry, right? Then it starts giving us a clear identification of what their key constraint is, especially if they're good to go on everything else. And I say good to go, like they're checking the boxes of the normative data that we have within our sports and our positions, from LVP to jumping metrics and so forth. So now it gives us a clear indication of what we can attack to hopefully like decrease any type of risk. The second reason that we do that, and the other reason that we're collecting this information, is because we can leverage this as a monitoring tool. And we can take a certain percentage of their OPR, optimal power resistance, and have them rip into it a few reps, like 2 or 3 times. So we'll use the example of the leg curl to give us a sense of their current functional state. So after we've tested them 3 to 5 times, then we can start building out some ranges, right? Just leveraging standard deviations based off of their norms. And are they falling within that healthy range, or are they falling outside of that? If they fall outside of that range on, say, like a -1 standard deviation or more, then it gives us an idea of like what can we immediately change within that session for that, right? So it's giving us an idea of, one, is there a potential risk factor? Not saying it's absolute. Nothing is in this field. But it gives us an idea of a potential risk factor as an asymmetry. And then also we're able to identify the individual's functional state at that very moment in time before we go outside and do, like, say, top end speed work, accelerations. And it can inform how we can adjust that game plan or that training session for that day. And we've tested this fairly extensively with guys coming off of flights, dehydration, coming in from a long weekend, and we've been finding a pretty strong correlation of not being able to hit within their specific ranges. And it usually lines up with how they're feeling. So we're getting that subjective feedback and then objective feedback within one session. And we know that they're not just trying to, take it easy that day. We know that they're actually telling us the truth. And yes, we believe our athletes. They are paying us in this situation, not in Hunter's situation, but they're paying us to help them. So it helps us keep them in the best possible environment, and we can leverage those constraints to help them continuously improve their performance capacity.
Yeah, awesome. And it's going to be a question for both of you. And Hunter, you mentioned addressing things more locally, right? So with these tests, and Rich, something that's a leg curl, right? That is very local, right? We're talking about knee flexion. Hunter, for you, having tests that are more jump based, and it is this more global movement, albeit it is more specific to a basketball jump, which is fantastic for your athletes. And it can really be very telling for many types of athletes. Hunter, how do you then take this test that is more global and start to pinpoint, hey, here's a local area that we need to start addressing?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think so much about local tissues during the in-season period. Like, what I call local tissue prep is at the forefront of my mind and like very high on my list of qualities and things that I need to try to attack. Now, when I say that, I also think, man, I really need to add some local tissue assessment to maybe my initial screening. It may not have to be often, but to get this baseline data for my individuals, for the individuals that I work with. So all that to say, I do think there is a ton of value in a local assessment. I do also think that when we're dealing with local tissues, I think just the subjective feedback from the individual is also very helpful and what I rely on right now. Like, if I have now I had a conversation the other day with Trent Salo, who is a genius when it comes to tendons, runs the tendon lab in Michigan. And me and a friend of mine were talking about like this presentation of pain versus no pain. And just because there's no pain doesn't mean that there's not issues with the tissue. So we have to be careful when we're just reporting pain or discomfort. However, I'm probably not going to be doing ultrasounds on my athletes to determine the quality of their tissues, at least at this point in my career. So the subjective evaluation and subjective feedback I get from those individuals is very impactful. And if I have a guy that says, yeah, my left knee is really bothering me, and I load it over the course of however many days and perform different things to try to alleviate some of that discomfort, and he says, yeah, it's feeling great, especially when he's cold, walking off the bus, not just warmed up and playing, then I am happy with that result, whether there's a specific objective assessment I've performed on that local tissue.
Yeah. Rich, it makes me think about like your environment and kind of what you were just talking about here. Assessing at the beginning of a session, you have the subjective feedback, you're laying on top of it, then trying to make adjustments. It seems like all that's happening really fast, right? Like kind of on the fly. So talk through that, like the challenges of maybe having to make decisions really quickly. At what point is this something that, okay, we flagged it versus, well, this is an issue and we need to now address it prior to moving on to, like, let's say the field for sprinting or something like that?
I think it's always contextual, right? Based off of the individuals that you are getting ready to take out to do whatever on the field within a movement session. But in all of our training, we have contingency plans. Um, that's just part of, I think, part of being just a good practitioner is being able to make informed decisions on the fly. And so, if you're using, say, counter movement jump as an assessment, or for our instance, maybe we're using a velocity at OPR on an air squat or at a leg press, or in this example, a leg curl, and we're good and ready to go out and do some like flying tens with a 30-yard buildup. And if we've got guys that are dropping below that within that one day, then we can immediately just make a transition and have the contingency plan already built in and say, all right, we're going to be working more of a technical aspect and start hitting some tempos instead of hitting a flying, because they'll understand the risk there based off of one, how they're feeling. That's objective feedback that Hunter was talking about. And then two, the objective feedback, because it's right there and like on the screen in front of them. So not only are they feeling it, but then they become aware of it, because there's some days that they're going to come in, they're going to be feeling a little tough, or a little rough from whatever training that we've been doing, or maybe they went out for the weekend and they're still ripping it and they're feeling good. But it's having those contingency plans built in to being able to make those adjustments on the fly and just being able to recognize, all right, well, we got 3 out of the 15 guys within the session that drop below, their range. Let's have them go off to the side, okay, and working together. We're going to go through the same warm up, seeing how we're feeling, getting their, feedback, and then being able to, making sure that we're assessing everyone's flying 10. We're going through the session, and then once they come up, right, we're going to have them work more technical aspects or have them run at like say 70% of their max speed or 80%, just holding them back. And we're running through the gates or on a 1080, so we can help kind of objectify that too, like making sure that we're having those metrics and telling them, hey, you need to pull it back a little bit, or yeah, just stay right there, right, or even speed it up some. But it's just ensuring that you start off with a contingency plan from the start and knowing that it's going to happen. And we've got to be able to make the best decisions possible in the moment for the athletes.
Yeah, awesome. And one quick follow-up on that too would be, you had mentioned LVP before with air squat, with leg curl. And, LVP is not something you need Keiser for necessarily to perform, but can you just expand on maybe what the advantage of having pneumatics, what the advantage has been of being able to implement pneumatics with LVP and kind of the value you place with that?
Yeah, so I always tell everyone that we will perform our force plate assessments, whether that's a counter movement jump, a squat jump, RSO, whatever it is, right? And in this situation, we'll take metrics from the counter movement jump, and that tells us how they're producing forces, right? How they are, what is their output, what is their strategy, and what are their specific times and different phases, and we're able to break that down. So we have a decent understanding of how they're producing forces. And then say a global LVP, so Keiser air squat, right? So lower body, but velocity profile is going to tell us what type of forces that they leverage in order to accomplish the task. So are they more velocity dependent or are they more strength dependent? And pneumatics allows us to really assess the velocity characteristics of the individual organism, because they don't have to decelerate at the top. They can accelerate throughout the entire range of motion. So we have a true understanding of what their actual velocity characteristics are within that current time. And it helps us kind of pinpoint where we need to provide the specific stimulus to. So we always compare everything to our normative data based off their sport and their position, and we're able to tell like you are significantly above a standard deviation of like strength. So you are strength dependent, but your velocity, right, is just well below what it should be. That's what pneumatics allows us to assess, is that full spectrum of velocity all the way through power and into strength. right? And then it gives us a clear identification of what is your limiting factor, what's your key constraint that could potentially help you accomplish your task more efficiently.
Yeah, I'm going to use that now as a segue, a really nice segue to transition from assessments and this conversation surrounding assessments into training. I noticed that you guys had a little bit of fun together on social media, Hunter, talking about adaptive complexes, right, on the air squat. And let's start hitting on some of these different training methods, and we can begin, we'll hit on eccentrics, we'll hit on maybe some isometrics, but let's start with this adaptive complexes. Hunter, for you, what was that experience like in talking with Richard or Rich about utilizing pneumatics through adaptive complexes?
Yeah, so adaptive complexes are something that I've used, and they always kind of made sense to me. The most common pairing I would do would be like a split squat overcoming ISO and like a kettlebell rhythm split squat. That's something that I always just like felt like I wanted to program on my high force days. And then I read the Breaking Performance framework from Damian Harper and Matt Van Dyke and Chris Arentis and those guys, and they put a name to it. It's overcoming isometric paired with what they said fast eccentric is an adaptive complex. And it's a way to, in layman's terms, like potentiate the nervous system with the overcoming isometric before you perform the fast eccentric. Now, with that being said, I currently don't have access to pneumatic resistance. I don't have any at ASU, and I have a home gym that I work out at primarily, and I don't have anything there. Wink, wink, Keiser. And we went on a trip to Vegas, and we stayed at a fairly nice hotel. And I walk into the hotel, and there's a Keiser air squat. And I was like, no way. And Rich, I think I sent you a picture of it right after I saw that. And I just began messing around on it. And me and Rich had the conversation of what I call drop catches or fast eccentrics with pneumatic resistance versus just traditional loading. And Rich was talking to me about just the fact of like you're working with gravity versus like pneumatic resistance that is actually like pushing you faster toward the ground. And he said that and it made sense, but I never experienced it. So when I walked in, I saw the air squat. I thought, well, I'm going to try some drop catches out. And it felt completely different to exactly what Rich said. Like when you're performing a trap bar drop catch, especially if the load isn't high, you are just dropping at the rate that gravity is pushing you ultimately, Now we put the Keiser on, and now it is pushing me so much faster toward the ground. So that to me just like souped up drop catches much more than just traditional loading. I haven't had the chance of getting plates on any type of Keiser equipment to actually look at ground reaction forces, because that's why I think that drop catches can be so potent pairing with the eccentric stimulus that they provide. And then I'm weak enough that I was able to just load that Keiser air squat up all the way and perform an overcoming isometric at the bottom. So then I was thinking, man, I can just do an adaptive complex right here on this piece of equipment and don't even need to move, because I just loaded that air squat to like
heavy enough.
I think it was like a souped up one that went heavier than usual ones because
I'm sure.
That's exactly.
Yeah, so I just loaded that heavy, performed an overcoming isometric, and then I just dropped the weight, stood up with it, performed the drop catches. And that was my adaptive complex, which I thought was awesome because it was efficient because I'm in the same spot. All I'm doing is pressing a button to change. And then also you get the increased, I'm assuming the increased ground reaction force from the drop catch with the pneumatic resistance as opposed to traditional loading.
So shout out to, I guess you haven't posted it yet, Gabe, but Phil Nash and I have actually tested the drop catches on the force plate. Did you guys go into talking about that at all in the podcast?
No, we had a conversation yesterday more so related to just some of the education processes through Exos. So he said, you know what? I asked him about it. And he's like, I'm going to save that for Rich because you're talking to him tomorrow.
So yeah, it was like 6:30 in the morning and we were like, let's do this. And we did a trap bar, drop catches, as well as Keiser pneumatic resisted drop catches on the Keiser deadlift machine. And we started off with body weight. So the external load was our body weight. And then we would go up by 50 pounds. And what we found, as soon as you start to kind of go up in load and intensity, that the rate of force development drastically like skyrockets leveraging pneumatic resistance, which makes sense, right? Because you're not operating anymore with gravity. You're taking momentum out of it. You're taking inertia out, it's accelerating you to the ground faster.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting experiment to kind of one, just see the objective metrics coming through and like, okay, yeah, this definitely clarifies everything that we thought we believed. And it definitely checked the box of, yeah, like we're heading in the right direction with our thought process. So we'll definitely use pneumatics for drop catches just to help improve rate of force development, especially if we have individuals that are significantly lacking in like the braking phases of their counter movement jumps. And if they're having a hard time with the unweighing phase too, and really just like help teach or provide a stimulus to help get the adaptation of rate of force development in that braking phase. With some of our athletes, we can use pneumatics for some overcoming stuff. Not too many, sorry, Hunter. But what we do use the hell out of them for yielding or holding isometrics.
Yeah, no question.
Because the ground force reactions there are pretty much the same with mass and pneumatics. That is to say, though, you cannot adjust the load intra rep with external mass, right? With mass, you can with pneumatics. So we just got done with a foundation phase one with our NFL season group, and we were doing up to like 20, 30-second split squat isometrics, just like what Hunter was talking about. And we'll have the spotters sit there and have their feet in the racks on the pedals and ready to adjust. So if we're getting like really significant force tremors to where it is starting to like disrupt their actual position in that pattern that they're trying to hold, we can start to kind of adjust the load accordingly, right? To kind of calm the system down and just providing that sweet spot stimulus, right? And we can't do that with mass. It's like, all right, hold on, like let me take some plates off or drop the dumbbells and go grab some other dumbbells, right? So it's a very unique tool that you have access to when leveraging pneumatics that you can adjust intra-rep. And then we can also use them with EQIs, eccentric quasi-isometrics, and adjust the load accordingly there. And we can do joint isolated EQIs, and we can also do global EQIs, the compound EQIs, if we're doing air squats, bench press, and so forth. So we've kind of experimented a little bit with smaller population sizes with heavy EQIs with the air squats and bench press, and have had some pretty, I'd call it significant results if we're looking at counter movement jump output. So yeah, fun.
Hunter, you got to get over there and you got to check out the deadlift.
I've seen it. I went and visited Rich after you guys outfitted Exos
Okay,
with
cool.
cave stuff, and I was like, what the hell is that?
Rich was talking about changing loads, right, with mass-based resistance in the middle of a rep. I've seen some of the videos that you've had too, right? Obviously, scanning your social, being able to take that deadlift. I know you like those eccentrics where you're adding mass plates, taking them on and off. And in my head, I'm thinking, well, how easy would that be if you just can press a button, you know, and actually just change the load.
Yeah, don't even say that right now until I get some Keiser equipment, because that is like, because don't get me wrong, like I think the trap bar version of that is actually a lot easier and went a lot smoother when I did it for like the super maximal eccentric loading, particularly what I did this summer. Like when I first thought of that idea, because I really just rely on like trap bar deadlifts, rear foot elevated split squats. Like I'm not really loading like a back squat ever with my guys. And I think that's what you see typically with like weight releasers is like you're in a front squat, you're in a back squat. So I was like, well, what can I do? And came up with the trap bar, and I was like, well, that's kind of sketchy to be putting plates on when guys are holding near maximal load at the top of rep. But I was like, I'm just going to try it with sub-maximal load when they're not dealing with as much intensity. And it actually went really smooth, and I used it all summer, and I think it worked great. But yeah, thinking about the ability or the process of an athlete standing with that in particular, adding load at the top and then having them perform the movement, I think is next level in terms of super maximal eccentric loading. And then you even get into being able to do that on any piece of equipment, including the local stuff. You perform the concentric portion of the lift, add load, and then it's a super maximal eccentric.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, not trying to sell you, but I'm just connecting the dots here with, Rich talking about, the EQIs specifically with the air squat. You can do that in a split squat position. And I was just thinking about the test that you do with the body weight split squat isos, right? And just trying to make a connection between those two in terms of maybe trying to increase performance in a test like that? I would just be curious to know. I don't have the answers. Like over a long period of time, training that for a while with the Keiser, coming back, retraining with maybe some dumbbells at body weight. I'd just be curious to know what that looks like, over time.
Yeah, there's definitely something there. I think it's the ease of the application of actually doing the assessment. And I think that obviously, whenever you add efficiency to an equation, like effectiveness isn't always going to change, but in some situations it can. And I think this is a situation that it probably could.
So I'm going to go to Hunter for this, then Rich right afterwards. Like, what interests you right now? What rabbit holes are you going down in terms of training right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like my mind is all over the place. I would say the thing that I'm really like trying to refine currently is using the force system and how I think about like my methodology and how I think about training in a return to play setting. I have, like I mentioned a couple times now, a return to play case that I've been working with this season, and it's a really cool situation because like he travels with us on the road, like he's a part of everything we do, so it's not like I leave and he's at home training with the GA. Like he's with us all the time. So like right after we get done with this podcast, I'm going to train him. And now that I've like thought about my methodology so much, it's just how I think about training, regardless if it's performance or return to play or whatever it may be. So when I was going through this return to play case, I just found myself like applying the principles that I've known within the force system to a return to play setting. And similar progressions, but there's like shifting and blendings of certain things that I think can be very impactful, pulling from a lot of smart individuals that I've learned from to flow throughout a return to play process using the force system. And it works in my head and it flows well. And I think that what I'm constructing correlates with certain aspects of different individuals' philosophies from return to play sense that I respect and hold very highly, like Kyle Salmons with the Cardinals and Danny Foley in San Diego, like some of those guys that I really rely on from return to play sense. Like the things that I'm trying to do with my system from return to play perspective aligns with certain aspects of what they do. And I know if I can align my ideas, put my own twist on it with the way that they go about doing things, that I'm probably on the right route. So that's really been my biggest thought process right now, is blending the force system, which I really created out of like a performance perspective, to a return to play setting.
Shout out Danny Foley, former Keiser podcast guest. Rich, for you, what's really interesting to you right now?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of similar boat with Hunter, and shout out to Kyle Salmons. He's kind of helped us along this journey that we've been going through with these low velocity profilings and experimenting with EQIs and stuff. But definitely like really starting to kind of dive into how we can leverage pneumatics in an RTP situation. And pretty much everything that Hunter said is kind of like, that's why probably we talk all the time, is we're constantly exploring new avenues or alternative routes that we could take, or more advanced or just completely like nuanced routes that we could take to help individuals kind of get back as soon as possible in a safe manner, of course. But on the other side of that, it's how can we really leverage yeah, I've been working with you guys and Keiser for, I guess, about 2 years now. It's like how can we really leverage pneumatics to kind of, one, identify, monitor, and continue to assess uh, s- specific key constraints for individuals. And that's kind of like where the leg curl came out of, right? We noticed that we weren't getting much out of the isometric assessment on the hamstrings, and so we decided to like leverage pneumatic resistance to try to assess, monitor, and train individuals from a leg curl, right? So like, how can we help provide the most efficient stimulus possible in order to get the outcome needed as quickly as possible? So taking an individual and significantly improving specific strategies within their counter movements, or improving their strategies in, say, a sprint, right? How can we leverage pneumatic resistance to do that? And I think it's a very open area of exploration. It can go as deep and broad, and, wherever you wanted to take it, but that's kind of where I've been recently, and kind of where I continue to go. Like, all right, well, this person needs to improve their stretch shortening cycle utilization. I will, what protocols can we leverage in pneumatic resistance and training in order to help them get that. Because sometimes we'll have guys in here for 2 weeks that, are at the end stage of an RTP, right? And we've got to help them get back out on a team as quickly as possible, because that's their livelihood, right? So that's kind of what's always in the back of my mind, is taking care of our athletes and providing them the best stimulus possible in the shortest amount of time in order to get them back out.
Yeah, and while you're in this exploration phase, as you're trying to figure things out, Hunter, like you alluded to this too, off air, was, we're always making our best guess at the end of the day. Rich, what's been the impact of changing to something like, posterior chain LVP, hamstring tests? Like, how's the efficacy of it been? Has it been valuable for you?
Can't say anything regarding the hamstring assessment yet. I can say we had a pretty significant return to play, where we had an individual that came in, NFL athlete that came in for partial hip replacement rehab. And a year prior to that, he had a quad tendon rupture, excuse me. And was still experiencing some pain in that knee, and hip was fine. And so we took him through force plate assessment. We took him through air squat assessment, not finding any major asymmetries in the force plate assessment. The Keiser squat LVP was kind of on par, still lacking some velocity. And then we took him through overcoming isometric assessment at 90 degrees of knee flexion and 60 degrees of knee flexion, and he was surprisingly symmetrical. And then we decided to take him through a leg extension LVP. And when we took him through a leg extension LVP, his OPR on his left and right side, like, the outcome was 57% asymmetry for his non-injured side versus, we'll call it, healthy side. And that was like a light bulb moment for us. And so we started leveraging metrics from that LVP, and started taking him through different protocols, like different EQIs and so forth, and the leg extension and other exercises as well. We just kind of added in the leg extension and different protocols there within his rehab. And within 4 weeks, we saw that asymmetry drop down to, I think it was like within the 20%. And then within 6 weeks, it was within like 13%. And we started to see his performance metrics, his counter movement jumps, his sprints, everything started to significantly improve. And if you look at it from like just a scatter plot, you just see this nice little linear progression with everything. But we wouldn't have been able to do that if we didn't have the leg extension. We wouldn't have been able, one, to identify it, and then two, be able to train like we trained it. And that individual ended up getting cleared from us and from our PT staff that did an amazing job, and go out and do a workout for multiple NFL teams right after that. So that all happened within just like probably 2 to 3 months. And that was probably the most impactful, meaningful moment, and also just an ignition moment for me, where I'm like, all right, there's something to this. Let's start diving.
Yeah, awesome. A really great example of like identifying a local issue, right? And then seeing an adaptation there, which then contributes to like a more enhanced, a better global performance. So
I think you were like the first person that even said that in LA at the Red Bull facility, where you were like, yeah, I'm going to give you partial credit for this, Gabe, where you were like, yeah, this allows you to start pulling the onion back and diving deeper and deeper into the layers.
I said that.
Yeah.
Must have read a book that morning. I appreciate that. It's really cool to see that into practice. And thanks for walking us through that. It's always nice to hear some specific examples. Hunter, I know you're on the road right now. You got like a couple minutes left here. So got a couple of fun questions to finish up with for you guys. Just kind of some quick hitters. But Hunter, before we do that, any resources you'd like to share? I know you have the Force system, maybe your social media too. Please share.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I would say my social media is probably like the place where you can access any of it. I have a website that's not particularly unveiled yet, but good enough. It's forcesystem.com, and it has a lot of information on there that can direct you in certain ways.
Cool. And then Rich, for you guys at Exos, or anything that you maybe want to share, potentially a social media handle too, where's a good place for people to connect with you?
Social media wise, it's at Coach Rich Pruett, Pruett. You're not going to see much there. I just pretty much repost everything that Exos puts out, unless it's a few like hiking or racing videos that I'm getting into on the weekends, but you can definitely connect with me there. And then Exos has a plethora of educational resources as well that you can reach by going to our website and being able to go into the Exos education portion of the website. We are going to be dropping a new Exos XPS certification later this year. So I don't know if that's being promoted yet, but I do know that we're going to be putting it out later this year. So keep your eyes out for that.
Awesome, guys. Appreciate it. Hunter, you'll kick off with this one. Favorite restaurant in the Phoenix Tempe area?
Man, I was thinking that you were going to hit us with training questions, and now I'm having to shift gears, and we don't eat out that much, so this is
toughest question, toughest of the day.
Rich, you go first, so I have a second to think about this.
God, I'm the same boat, man.
Okay, I'll say this. This isn't a restaurant, but I'm like a big coffee shop fiend. Like, other than
That works.
My family and whatever, like, I love coffee shops. So Satellite Coffee in Phoenix, probably near Rich, probably a little bit south of Rich. They have a shaken espresso with a salted cold foam. Man, it is the best coffee you'll ever have. Satellite Coffee.
Got it. Thank you.
Gotta check it out.
Probably Buck and Ryder. Solid restaurant, good atmosphere. It's in the Scottsdale area. Haven't had a bad meal there yet.
I didn't think I'd be able to stump you guys today. All I had to do was ask about food, but all right. Satellite Coffee, shaken espresso, Buck and Ryder. Thanks, guys. And then, all right, Rich, going to you on this one. Super Bowl prediction.
I can't give you one. I got guys that are playing on both sides.
I knew that was going to be the answer. I had to try. Hunter.
I did grow up a Patriots fan, but I've got some. We've got some athletes on the Seahawks. But I would say this: the Seahawks defense is firing on all cylinders right now, so the Patriots are going to have a really tough job.
Diplomatic. I like it.
I would say honestly, the Seahawks and the Patriots are probably my two least favorite teams in the NFL. I'm a Chiefs fan, so this year was rough, but I'm not used to seeing us play late in the playoffs. So I'm going to go Seahawks. I think it's the lesser of two evils, in my opinion. And as Rich said, like, their defense is phenomenal, and I don't know, Sam Darnold is probably a little bit better of a quarterback than Drake May. Maybe. Oh, that's what I'll go with.
All right, guys. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for making time and joining us on the Keiser Human Performance Podcast. Can't wait to catch up with you guys soon. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thanks.
Thanks, Gabe.